Hey there and welcome to Phlearn. My name is Aaron Nace and I'm excited to bring you the third and final part of our project. This is a little fairy tale in which a young boy and his stuffed animal Bakster, he comes to life at night and they go on adventures. And in this image we're going to be pulling together everything that we've done as a part of our 3-part series to create a little bit of a hide and go seek image with Bakster. So if you haven't already done so, be sure to check out part 1 and part 2. This is a completely free series. You can download all of the source assets, including the custom Photoshop brushes, as well as raw images on phlearn.com. And you can do so by following the link on your screen or in the description right down below. So as you may have noticed, I'm here at my house wishing you health and love. We've got a really great tutorial for you. I can't wait to finish this off. Let's jump into Photoshop. So here we are in Photoshop, and I gotta say, I think our image is looking really, really nice. We've got Bakster in our image. You can see we've composited him in there. I think we're looking great. The entire right side of the image we pulled together in the first tutorial. So you can see this is where we started with this entire project. We've already pulled a lot of this image together. And in this section, we're going to be removing our light stand. We're gonna be adding a beam of light. We'll show you a really cool way to make that look realistic. We're gonna be blending Bakster in a little bit, doing more color work, and then coloring and toning the image as a whole, as well as cropping in a little bit on the right-hand side. Alrighty, let's get started here. So we're gonna create a new layer and I'm gonna go ahead and group this. We're just gonna call this object removal. There we go. And I do like to get rid of anything that's kind of not serving us. I mean, especially if it's just a light stand like this. My tool of choice is the spot healing brush tool. Just make sure that sample all layers is checked up there. And basically you just kind of wanna paint right over the thing you wanna remove. And I gotta say, you know, I've been doing Photoshop for a long time now. I've been using Photoshop for a long time now. And Adobe's done a lot of work on this tool, the spot healing brush tool. And it works very, very well most of the time. You simply just paint over the thing you want gone, and most of the time does a really good job of figuring out exactly what you want done. So we're just gonna simply paint over this area. This was a light stand supporting a large softbox that's lighting our subject. So let's just paint right over the light stand, and it's at the very corner of our image, a little bit out of focus, and it's not an area that everyone's gonna look. So in my opinion, it doesn't have to be 100% perfect, but looks, you know, even saying that, the spot healing brush tool is doing a great job. So if you're ever nervous about having a light stand or something in your image, you can of course just do this, try to remove it in post. You can also simply take a photo with the light stand there and then take another photo with the light stand out and composite those together like we showed you how to do in the first section of this tutorial. But look at this. I mean, this tool is really quite amazing. You know, back in the early days of Photoshop, I would be relying mostly on the clone stamp tool to get this job done, but wow, spot healing brush tool, come on. How can you ask for anything better than that? What do you have, magic? Easy, easy, easy to remove this sort of thing. So whether you're working with distractions like this or just about any other type of distractions, the spot healing brush tool does a great job. And we're just gonna take care of a couple other things that are just a little bit distracting in our image. But look at that, light stand gone. Got a little piece of trash there on the ground and a little light spot that's kind of pulling my eye in that direction. All in all, this is supposed to be a back alley photo, so I'm not trying to make it, you know, perfectly clean. I'm okay with a little bit of dirt and things like that. All right, we're looking good. I'm gonna go ahead and crop in our image. Let's hit C for the crop tool. I'm gonna make sure where it says delete crop pixels to uncheck that. That way, if I want some information back, I can get it back at any time. But for now, I don't really need that much information there. I kind of want Bakster like hiding in the corner right there. So again, if I decide to change this crop at any time, it's really easy to do. Just click on your image, click and drag out, and you can extend your crop back again. So let's say you were trying to fit this correctly for a certain print size, you could always, change your crop. Obviously, you could crop in from the top and the bottom and things like that as well. Well, the next thing we're going to do is create our beam of light from the flashlight. So we're going to create a new layer. Let's group it with itself by hitting Controller Command G, and we're just going to call this flashlight. Now, what I want to do is create a beam of light coming from the flashlight itself. So we basically have a couple of things that we want to keep into account with a beam of light. One, I kind of want to make it look a little bit atmospheric. So we've got a great brush that basically allows you to paint like fog, which is incredibly cool. And we're going to be using that here. Also, we want the beam of light to be relatively focused where the flashlight begins, and we kind of want it to blur out as we go, to the left side of my image, and then we want a core to the light. So we're going to be creating this light with a few different layers. So anytime I'm creating light or shadow, I like to use a few different layers, a few different intensities, and that way it gives me a lot of room to kind of adjust and make sure everything feels right. So we're going to start this off. There are a lot of ways to do this. I'm just going to go ahead and grab a levels adjustment layer. Okay. And I'm going to take my darks and just make them a little bit less dark. There we go. And then I'm also going to take my blue channel and we're going to pull in some of the, I'm going to take some of the blues out of the highlights. There we go. And we're going to go to the green channel and pull a little bit of the greens out of the highlights too. So it's kind of giving us a bit of a fog type light. Now what we're going to do is grab our polygonal lasso tool. I want to just grab the flashlight and create our beam of light. This is really, there's no right or wrong way to do this. There we go. That looks pretty good. Now I'm going to hit Controller Command I to invert my layer mask. Let's deselect and then hit Controller Command I again. Now check this out. You can hit Controller Command T for transform. I'm going to bring my little control point here, like on the actual flashlight. And then I'm going to rotate it. But before I do, I'm going to hit Controller Command H to hide that little thing. And then check this out. I can actually, let's extend it a little bit further. I can just rotate this to like whatever feels right, like this feels like he's pointing a little bit too low. That feels actually pretty good. Like, okay, maybe somewhere right around there. It's nice to be able to do this with, maybe I'll come down a little bit lower. It's nice to be able to do this without any of the boundaries in there, so I can just kind of like get an idea of what actually fits in here. So the whole idea is, young boy and Bakster, they're playing hide and go seek. So I want Bakster to be kind of hidden in the background. We're going to darken this and color it and everything like that. So the like focal point of the image should be the boy and then the beam of light, and then you're kind of like, what is he looking for? And then I want it to come around and find Bakster. So part of that journey is going to be darkening this area down, and we're going to be doing that in just a bit when we color tone. So this is looking pretty good so far. Let's go ahead and I'm going to take my midtones and just make them a little bit brighter here. Okay, there we go. And then now on my layer mask itself, let's hold Alt or Option and click on my layer mask so we can see this is what the layer mask looks like. I do want to add some blur to this beam of light, and kind of a fun little thing. I want the blur to be more blurred at, the farther it goes from the light, and less blurred as it gets closer to the light. So there's a cool way you can do this. What we're going to do is hold Controller Command to make this into a selection. Okay, then I'm going to click on a new layer. I'm going to hit Shift Delete, and we're just going to fill this with white. There we go. And we'll just make that levels adjustment layer invisible now. So now we're going to go ahead and apply a blur to this, a special blur. We're going to go to Filter, down to our blur gallery, and I'm going to go to a Tilt Shift Blur. We're just going to rotate this blur around. We just got to go right over here to where you get the little rotate icons. There we go. Boop. There we go. And we're just going to rotate it right about to 90 degrees. Okay. And then this we're gonna push over here, and then there we go. We need to just move our midpoint out there as well. All right, and we'll bring you in there as well. So this is a tilt shift, but basically what this blur does is it keeps the middle of the blur in focus, and it'll blur more as it goes out in this direction. So typically used to kind of imitate a tilt shift lens, but in this case, we're just gonna do it with the flashlight. So we have a midpoint here. So this, we kind of want to be in the midpoint of the beam of light, and then this is our end point here. So we're gonna take the little blur slider here, and I'm just gonna crank this to the right a little bit. All right, you guys get to hear the sirens outside of my house, apparently. We're gonna crank that to the right, and you know what? I think we can go ahead and start the blur here a little bit earlier. There we go. We'll push this to the right there. Pretty cool. So you have the option here to drag your blur slider, you know, how much or how little blur you want. And then once this is, you know, like pretty well, yeah, I think something like that looks pretty good. So just hit OK up at the very top. That's looking pretty good. It just takes a second to calculate that. Now, I do want to go ahead and apply a little bit more of a blur, especially right around the flashlight itself, because it's, you know, you would never have like a super solid edge on a beam of light like that, unless it was a laser, I guess, but it's not a laser. So now we're just gonna give it a regular blur. So we'll go to filter, blur, and then Gaussian blur, okay? And then we're just gonna kind of go to where it's, you know, somewhat believable. There we go, something like that. So you can see there's a blur here, but it definitely gets more intense as it goes off in that direction. Okay, now this is just a white shape, you know, I can just move this around. But what's cool is, remember we created this on a layer mask here. I'm gonna just fill this layer mask with black for now. So Shift Delete is my keyboard shortcut for the fill dialog. We'll just fill this with black. Now, if I want this shape to be applied on the layer mask, it's very easy to do. To turn any layer into a selection, just hold Control or Command and click on the thumbnail. You can see I have a little hand icon with a selection icon there. So I'm just turning that into a selection. We'll just make that layer invisible. And then here on the layer mask for this levels adjustment layer, I'll hit Shift Delete and fill that with white. There we go. So we now have, you know, what's this shape is now applied to the layer mask on this layer. Pretty cool, right? Now, not only does the beam of light, we want it to spread out as we go, but we want a core of this light as well. So we're just gonna duplicate this layer, Control or Command J, and then we're gonna hit Control or Command T, okay? And then transform. I'm gonna just squish this down, holding Shift while I do that. Okay, there we are. And then we just get to move this guy too. You know, this becomes our core. So let's just transform this out a little bit. Maybe it stretches out there a little bit. You can hold Control or Command to, there we go. And then this little core, just, we want to do a little bit more of a blur. So we'll just go to Filter, and you can do this right here on the layer mask, blur, and then Gaussian blur. There we go. So we're looking like we have a core. And I want to do that one more time. So Control or Command J to duplicate it. We're going to shrink this down a little bit more, hit Enter. And basically each time you do this, it just adds more dimension to the light. Let's hit Control or Command T. I just need to rotate that about to the center. It just adds more dimension to the light, and it's going to wind up looking more realistic. So here's, you know, the first kind of unidimensional, adding a second, and then a third. I think this second one, we just want to blur a little bit more. There we go. That's looking pretty good. So now we have all of these things together. I want to add a little bit of atmospherics to this, basically to kind of make it look like this is going through some fog. Now this one I want to blur a little bit more as well. It's not a precise science here, as you can see, it's kind of going by feel. I want to add a little bit atmosphere to this to make it look like it's going through fog. To do that, we're going to be using one of the custom brushes that's included in this tutorial. So we're gonna go to B for the brush tool. You can just right click and go to your little menu item down here, go to import brushes, and you just wanna import the Bakster brush.abr. That's gonna include a couple different brushes, and one of those is the Phlearn cloud brush. Now the cloud brush is super cool. Basically, I'll just create on a new layer. We'll paint with the cloud brush. Basically, it just, when you paint with it, it makes it look like clouds. You can make this larger, smaller, and my suggestion is to, look at that, how cool is that, right? My suggestion is to lower your flow a little bit, so maybe like 30% flow, and you get something like that, which just kind of looks really fun. Okay, so this is just painting with white on a new layer, but what we can do is here on the layer mask, so this layer, I held Alt or Option to click on the layer mask. If I paint black on the layer mask here, look at this, it just kind of adds some atmosphere to this. Okay, now I'm gonna hit undo on that because you might not want to do it right on the layer mask, but there we go. If you do, you can get some really cool results. If you feel like, hey, this is, let's just make those invisible now. If you feel like this is a cool effect, you can kind of spread it around a little bit too. So let's do that here. There we go. And paint some white on the layer mask there as well. And this just gives it a little bit of like scattering. It makes it kind of look like the light is going through fog and just makes it a little bit more realistic in my opinion. So let's make another one of these layers. I'm just gonna fill the layer mask with black. So let's hit Shift Delete and fill this with black. And then this time we're just gonna make a small brush, still with this fog brush, and I'm just gonna kind of paint it in there, okay? So we've got like all of our blur stuff in there, but now this is me just like painting in some atmospheric fog. So you can see there, it just kind of makes it look like it's got some dimension. So if I hold Alt or Option and take a look at my layer masks, this is now what my layer mask looks like. So we have that initial shape in there, and then we're just adding a little bit more. I'm gonna do one more of these. There we go. So you can see it's like really starting to take take some shape here. Let's fill this layer mask with black, and then we're just gonna paint white on the layer mask there. So there we go. Kind of coming in close to the boy there. Okay, well, that's looking really, really nice. So these other layers that we use to make those shapes, we don't need them anymore. We can hit delete. So to make these things look realistic, it's just a great idea to use multiple layers. So let's just see, you know, one layer looks okay, 2 layers, 3, 4, 5. You can see how having more of these layers together just kind of like gives you a little bit more of the effect that you're looking for. It just gives the whole thing a little bit more depth, in my opinion. And I think that goes a long way towards creating something that looks a little bit more realistic. Okay, that's looking super, super cool. So we have this flashlight. Look at that, you just turn this flashlight off and on. Super fun and easy to do. Now we have something similar for the flashlight. I'm just gonna hit Controller Command J to duplicate this background layer here, okay? And we're just gonna call this street light, because if you've got, atmospheric fog coming out of your flashlight, you kind of need it around your street lights and stuff like that too, right? Or it's not gonna look real. So it's the same, this is just a levels adjustment layer that I just like took my darks and just made up a little bit lighter and adjusted some colors. So, nothing super crazy going on here. All the magic is here with our layer mask. So let's just fill the layer mask with black, Shift Delete, okay? And then we're just gonna paint it, white, like just around the street light here. There we go. And just go with like a little bit of a lower flow. So you can see we got a little bit of it there. We'll just do a little bit more of it. Okay, fill that layer mask with black. There we go. And we'll do one more of that. And this is honestly just I'm painting light. What? You can't stop me. Great. Now, there we go. Looking super, super good. The color here, I want to add just a little bit more like red. So let's go to our red channel and start pulling some of the red in there. Yeah, you can see how that's starting to pull in the colors. So this is the coolest thing about levels and curves is, you know, RGB is the combination of red, green, and blue. So you can make things lighter and darker, you know, fairly easy like this. And that's how most people use curves and levels. But if you go to your red channel, you can add more red or take red away. You can do all kinds of beautiful color work with levels and curves. You know, in my early days of Photoshop, I would create a bunch of layers to try to do my light and my color and everything. And then it's like, oh, I could just do all of that with one layer. So really, really powerful stuff here. There we go. Let's add a little bit more red to this one too. There we go. Give the street light a little bit of a red glow so it's got a slightly different color than this. So here we go. See that nice atmospheric glow we were able to add to the street light as well. Okay. Pretty cool, right? So already, look at this. We've just gone from, you know, light stand here. So we've removed that, added a flashlight glow, and then this street light. So now we're going to start coloring the image as a whole. So let's just create a new layer. We're going to group it with itself. Okay. Just call this color tone. There are so many ways to color an image. You can use curves, you can use levels, you can use gradient maps, color balance. A lot of the time, I just kind of go with whatever I feel at the moment. There really is no right or wrong way to do this. So we're going to show you a couple of different ways that I like to do this. Okay, so one of the first things that I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a solid color fill layer. Okay, a little bit fun, crazy technique here. We're just going to fill it with purple, and then I'm going to change this layer blend mode from normal down to lighten. Okay, now it's like, what are you doing, dude? Basically, this is going to be invisible anywhere that's lighter than this purple color. Okay. So you can see on the subject shirt, this layer is not visible. Now, this isn't the final purple we're going to choose. So that's really cool about these solid color fill layers is they're very easy to change colors. So let's just double click on the color here. And as I make it darker, it basically becomes less and less visible. And then you can kind of just like, you know, put it wherever you want in your shadows and find like a nice optimum balance with your color. So something like that looks really nice. It's way too visible at this point, but it does put a really nice purple in all of the shadows in the image. And again, it's only affecting the shadows because it's in a lighten blend mode. So what we want to do here is just start to lower our opacity. Okay, we just bring it down until, you know, like around 40% or so. You know, you kind of get the feeling of, oh, this is like a cool, like purpley type of image, but it's like just looking at this image, like right off the bat, you might not be like, there's purple in those shadows, but there is. So we just put it there. So that's really, really fun there. I do want to darken this image down a little bit, especially around here. So we're going to go ahead and take a levels adjustment layer here. I want this to be below our purple. So when you're doing like color toning specifically, you want that to kind of be on the top of everything, because let's just say, for instance, I, you know, created a new layer on top of this, and then I just put some black on this layer, right? You can see instantly this black is gonna look out of place. Like that should not be in this image, because the purple layer is telling the rest of the darks in the image to be a little bit of purple, but then this black is above that purple layer, and it's like there's no purple on that black, so it makes it look weird. So like if I put this purple layer above it, boom, you can see all of a sudden it's like, okay, I can see that could be in this image. We're not gonna put black there, but the point is, if you do any type of like color toning, you kind of want that to be at the end. So I'm gonna just do a little bit of work with our highlights here, because I wanna tone Bakster down a little bit, like just this side of the image here on the right hand side there. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Now I'm going to invert my layer mask here, And then we're gonna use our brush, and I'm actually just gonna use this, this fog brush. So you can see this is my layer mask here. Let's just bring our, the flow of our brush to like 10%. I like to use these like fog brushes and things like that for coloring because it really gives you a good way to kind of mask this effect. Like you can't really tell where this type of effect like starts and finishes. I'm just playing around on my layer mask, but I want to show you like, you know, that's what the layer mask is going to wind up looking like. So that's, you know, what the coloring is going to wind up looking like, or in this case, the darkening effect. So I'm kind of just darkening, you know, some areas that don't really need to be light, but it's going to give it a little bit more of this atmospheric effect. You know, that's kind of the goal. Alrighty, we're looking really good. I want to lower the contrast of our image here a little bit. It's still, especially on the right-hand side, I want Bakster to be a little bit more hidden. Again, this is like a hide and seek type of image. So we're gonna go to our levels again, okay? And to lower your contrast, you can make your lights a little bit darker and you can make your darks a little bit lighter. But if I do that, it's gonna be a little bit, it's not gonna look right. So I'm gonna take my midtones and make those a little bit lighter. There we go, while I make my lights a little bit darker. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. I'm gonna invert my layer mask here again and then just apply this little, and again, I'm painting with this fog brush here on my layer mask because it's, you know, it's kind of the theme of this image. Make things nice and foggy. All right, so we can see, you know, already we're getting some really nice color toning in this image, and Bakster's getting a little bit darker. Now I'm gonna go into the Bakster layer here. Remember, we have a lot going on here. We have the shadow of Bakster here, which I might just make a little bit less dark. And then we have Bakster as a whole, and I think I'm gonna go into my levels here and adjust his color a little bit. He's looking like a tiny bit like green almost. So let's just give him a little bit of magenta. You can use your up and down arrows here to kind of work with that. All right, let's reset that. That's not looking right. Keep in mind, like this type of coloring is like legit kind of difficult to do. So if you're like, this is always the part where I have, you know, trouble, you're not alone. It's the hard part. So, you know, it's all about finding a balance. And again, my goal here is to I want Bakster to kind of almost be not invisible, but I don't want him to be the first thing that you look at in this photo, right? It's a hide and go seek type of image. So I want it to actually like have a little bit of hide and go seek type of feel to it, you know? Like I want Bakster to be a little bit on the hidden side. There we go. So he's starting to look a little bit hidden. And if you like an effect that you did, but you're like, man, maybe just tone it down, just lower the opacity a little bit, and that's usually a sweet spot. Okay, that's looking really good. Also the highlights on Bakster, let's go ahead and grab let's do a solid color fill layer. I know it's crazy. These solid color fill layers, I never used to use them, but they're super powerful. The solid color fill layer, let's just change this from normal to soft light. And then if you want something to just be visible in either the highlights or the shadows, you can use blend if to do that. So the highlights are they're not looking right. I want them to be a little bit warmer. So I'm gonna double click here on this layer. Okay, we'll just bring this off to the side. And then here in your layer style, you're gonna see two bars on the bottom. And this is where you access blend if. It's one of the most powerful tools in Photoshop. So if you've never used this before, it's so cool. Basically, you can make this red layer that I just made, you can make this visible in either the highlights or the shadow of the image, and it's because it's clipped to Bakster, it's only going to be visible in, let's say, the highlights of Bakster. So what we're going to do is hold Alt or Option, and I'm gonna click and drag here from the left to the right. If you don't hold Alt or Option, you're gonna get some like scraggly type effect that does not look good. Okay, you're gonna get something like this. Okay, that's like, no, we don't want that. Nobody wants that, okay? So hold Alt or Option and click and drag from left to the right. That separates these two out, and that is what allows me to just have an effect like this be visible in either just the highlights or the shadows. Okay, let's hit okay. So now this red is basically just visible in the highlights of Bakster. Okay, now I don't actually want this to be red, but these solid color fill layers are so cool, especially when you use them with like soft light blending mode, because now I can just double click on this layer and I can explore what color I do want it to be. So I kind of want it to be like a warm color, right? So I get to kind of have fun with this, like how, you know, how warm of a color do I want this to be? Do I want it to be more orange? Do I want it to be more yellow? You know, this is, yeah, basically a good chance for me to kind of bring some color into the highlights of Bakster. So that actually is starting to look pretty good. So, you know, he's got a little bit of color in his highlights now that kind of matches the rest of this image. You know, here he was just looking a little bit muted. We're gonna double click here and I'm gonna bring this so it's just visible just in like his highlights here. Because you can change this. This is, you know, this is basically, you can say less and less visible, like only the brightest of the highlights will get affected now. Okay. There we go, something like that. And then again, it's a little bit on the strong side, so I'm just gonna lower the opacity here. Okay, because I just felt like he needed a little bit of like warmth in his highlights. So it was just looking a little bit too like muddy almost, you know? Hard to describe, but there we go. I think that's starting to look really nice. Now, keep in mind, Bakster, check out my man here. You know, he's just on his own, in his own group. So we can do coloring on the background too. So we're gonna create a new layer underneath Bakster. Okay, and we're just gonna call this coloring. So I wanna kind of color the sky behind Bakster just a little bit. So with this layer, let's grab hue saturation adjustment. Here we're gonna choose the colors. So we're just gonna say, it actually doesn't matter what color you choose here because you could just use the eyedropper tool and then just sample, and then you'll just wind up changing the color that you sample. So we can change our hue now to be a little bit more like purpley, right? And let's make that a little bit darker. So that's actually on the sky. Oh, there we go. And that's happening behind Bakster there. Now let's go ahead and create a levels adjustment layer. We're gonna just make the whole sky a tiny bit darker, especially behind Bakster. Invert our layer mask, and then with our brush tool, again, I'm gonna paint with that nice atmospheric cloud / fog brush. All right, that's looking good. There we go. It's kind of looking real purpley right now. So here, even though we just adjusted our light levels, let's go in here and work on our red levels here just a little bit. All right, our blue levels. No, this is not looking good at all. Let's just go ahead and reset that. All right, maybe it's this layer that I'm having trouble with. Let's just lower the opacity of that layer there. So as you can see, it's a real push and pull, you know, and to be honest, when I color things, you know, usually there we go, that's starting to look good. Usually I'm spending like a good, sometimes up to an hour. Sometimes, I mean, if it's like one of my like portfolio pieces, I mean, sometimes I'll work on coloring for days. Like I'll work on it for a little bit, go away, come back, because it's still not exactly where I want it to be. Like we're looking pretty good, But it's still not exactly where I want it to be, but we're getting closer. When I did this for the first time, I mean, I really spent days working on coloring this image. Not like straight, but it's nice to be able to work for a little bit, take a break, come back on it, take a break, come back on it. So if you guys are doing like advanced coloring, especially with this type of thing, I would recommend doing something similar. All right, let's go ahead and take a curves adjustment layer. There we go. Curves and levels are super similar. We're just gonna take the RGB values, bring that up a tiny bit here, and then we're gonna add a little bit of red. There we go. And then I'm gonna take down the blues, okay? And invert our layer mask. And then this is just gonna allow me to kind of create a little bit more of this yellow color, okay? That's gonna kind of go in the highlights here. All right. And then we're just gonna lower down the opacity of that to make it a little bit more subtle. There we go. All right, let's lower down the opacity of this one. And then other things that I like to do are create, when we're color toning, I really like, what are they called? Gradient maps. So let's go ahead and make one. All right, a gradient map is super cool. If you've never used one, prepare to just love gradient maps, because honestly, they're so powerful. So here's how they work. Let's just go ahead and clear away some stuff so we can actually see what we're doing. So a gradient map basically will map a gradient, like this is a gradient here, to your image, with the darkest parts of your image being mapped to the left-hand side of the gradient and the lightest parts of your image being mapped to the right side of the image. So my lightest part of my image right now is white. But let's go ahead and change that color. Let's go to like a nice, like light yellow. Okay. And now right over here, I want to throw in like a deep dark purple. Don't worry about getting all your colors right just off the bat, because it's kind of impossible to do. So I'm just going to throw a couple colors in there, and then we're going to adjust from there. All right, and that's going to be a nice dark blue. Okay, so you can see my image is going from black to dark blue to purple to orange to yellow to bright yellow, and that's what's actually happening here. So as you adjust these, you can move them left and the right, to the left or right, and you can see how it starts to affect your image. You know, if you want more brights or darks, you can get that in here really easily. Okay, this color I want it to be a little bit brighter and less saturated. Okay, this color is a little bit too green. Pop, there we go, a little bit less saturated there. Now, I don't plan on having this be visible at 100%. You know, this is, there we go. And then this black I want to take away, so it's going to just end in that dark purple there. All right, this mid-tone here, I want it to be a little bit more red. There we go. So think of this as like, right now it's like, ooh, it's very strong. We're gonna make this a lot more subtle, but that's actually looking pretty cool. I do like the colors there. It's like nice purpley red. So let's hit okay there. Okay, while I'm at here, by the way, I'm like looking at this coloring. I'm like, yeah, maybe I made this whole background too dark. There we go. Coloring is, for me anyway, it's so much of like a, let's try this, let's try this, let's try this. I've never been able to be like, do this, this, and then it's perfect. It's always like a thing I have to feel out. And like I said, it usually takes me days. But this gradient map here, super cool. What you want to do with it, because especially with composite images, you have all kinds of stuff we're working with here. But what this gradient map does is it ties everything together, because we're putting colors in the shadows, we're putting colors in the midtones and the highlights. And because it's at the top, it's applying throughout the entire image. So basically what you get is a unification of colors in your image, which is really cool for compositing. So what we want to do is just lower our opacity because it's way too visible. So we just take down our opacity, and somewhere right about there, check that out. See, it just gives the whole image, just kind of like comes together. I think that's what we were missing, honestly. I'm into it, you know? I think that really is, we'll just go in here and take a look at some colors here. But you can see how just turning that off and on, that really brought the whole color palette of the image together. Okay, this is still a little bit too strong, so let's just try bringing it down a little bit. All right, that's a little bit too strong there as well. So another couple of tips that I have when you're coloring your images and looking at composites and things like that, view your image in a few different ways. So things like transferring your image to your smartphone and looking it on your smartphone or a tablet. That's a cool way to do it when you're in the process of actually making it. Another thing to do is, so right now I'm in full screen. So if I hit Shift F, it's just going to be in like a window, right? Pretty cool. If I hit F one time, it's going to go full screen. If I hit F one more time, it's going to go full screen without windows. Okay. Now you can change the colors. If I right click, you can go like black, you know, so how does your image look on black? How does it look on dark gray? How does it look? If you go to select custom color, you can select white. I don't know why white isn't one of the standards, but it's not. But you know, how does it look like on white? This can actually really help you get an understanding of your image. Another thing that's really nice is if you hit R for your rotate tool, you can rotate your image like upside down, things like this. And surprisingly, this can really help. Like just doing that makes me feel like the top part of Bakster is like way too warm, right? Like maybe that wasn't the right choice, especially for the top part of Bakster. So let's just, you know, recolor him a little bit upstairs, you know, like what's going on up there. So it kind of like messes with your brain a little bit. Like, oh, what am I looking at? I do this with retouching and all kinds of stuff because you just you see the image in a totally different way, and it allows you to, it's like taking a break, basically, you know, it's like mentally kind of does the same thing. Like your mind gets very used to seeing things in certain ways. So I'm going to rotate it this way and see like, what is the effect, you know, here? How does it look there? You know, how does everything look here? It just allows you to see the image in a new light. I know it's kind of trippy. I'm looking at it myself and I'm like, these telephone poles leaning off to the, I didn't see that as much before, you know? But all of these things kind of come together in a way that allows you to basically kind of trick your brain. And that can be a really good thing. Yeah, so the highlight right there, like, I don't know, like that's not really working so much. So I'm just gonna like lower the opacity of that just a little bit. There we go. Cool, that's looking good. So that's why, you know, working non-destructively like this is so important, because you can go in here and change all these settings. Like it's very, very easy for me to go in and, you know, say, okay, how do I get back to my original Bakster? Well, like I just open this up and like, boom, shift click on the layer mask. And like, that is quite literally straight out of camera, right? So doing this allows me to make these changes at any time. And there we go. And I get to decide, you know, like what changes I want to make. And I can do this at any point in time, which is super cool. All right, let's go back to our coloring. Some of this stuff I'm like kind of not, I think this has a little bit too much color to it. So let's go back in here. Let's change our red values, just kind of bring that down a little bit. take our blue value and move that up a little bit. I know it's totally trippy, like why are, you know, you're looking at your image upside down and left and right and all this other stuff. But it really does help. So you can hit R for the rotate tool and kind of bring that back to where it was at. And then I think the sky just has too much saturation. I think that's my big beef with the sky. I don't even think it was necessarily about being too dark. I think it was just mostly about saturation. So let's just undo this. There we go. Cool. And then I'm trying to strike the balance between like a colored image and an image that's like not too colored. So this whole color tone, I'm gonna lower the opacity of like that entire group. Because I don't know about you, but I personally have a tendency to just kind of overdo things. So I'm always trying to like make sure that I'm not doing that. There we go. All right, I think that's looking really, really nice. I realize this is a little bit all over the place. Let's turn our check layers back on and see how the image looks in black and white. So my goal here, again, was to make this subject, like I want to look at the subject and then I want to find Bakster. So let's go ahead and create another levels adjustment layer. We're going to pop this down a little bit. There we go. And looking at your image in black and white, things like this, it can really help, you know. There we go. So I'm just kind of adding some contrast to this area here. There we go. So you can see now the boy in the image just kind of has the most contrast of anywhere in the image. Taking our lights and making them a little bit lighter. Because, again, my goal is to create a visual focal point with the subject. You know, like a painting. Like, I want the viewer to look at the boy first, and then I want the viewer to look at, like, Bakster and other things like that, right? So I'm doing this with light as well as color. All right, let's just pull a gradient in Bakster. There we go. So I'm just like darkening a subtle vignette. So these two layers, you can see a little bit more flat. And then here I'm adding a bit of a focal point. So now I feel like we're in black and white. I feel like we're pretty much there, right? Like I'm definitely looking at the boy first, and then I kind of come around and see Bakster. So I feel like in black and white, we're pretty much there. And yeah, I feel like in color, we're pretty much there too. Maybe just take a little bit of this color outside of the sky because it's already kind of purpley, and I don't know if I want the sky that purple. Yeah, super, super nice. All right, I think a tiny bit more like contrast on Bakster and we're done. So I'm gonna grab a solid color fill layer. Again, it doesn't matter what color you start with here. We're gonna clip it to Bakster. Okay. Let's make this just visible in the highlights there. There we go. And then we get to choose the color. And that color can just be white if you want it to just be white, you know. But it can also be colored, and that's usually just a little bit more interesting. There we go. See, yeah, that's looking really good. Just lower the opacity out of there. Because I'm trying to strike the balance between him just being like muddy in the shadows versus having a little bit of, oh, that's too much, see? Having a little bit too much contrast. I feel like that pretty much gets it there. Maybe just a tiny bit less opacity. But I'm happy with this. Let's hit F for full screen. We're gonna see how this looks on black. Controller Command 0 is gonna make it full size. And then I also recommend looking at your image full size, but then I also recommend looking at it tiny too. Like what, you get a really good sense of focal point when you see something tiny. Full size, it can be tough to see an image as a whole, but tiny, you start to see something a little bit different. So tiny and flipped over, there's all these different tools that I like. See, this blue up top that's not right. And I don't know if I would have found that. So let's just keep it upside down for right now. Up on the very top, I'm going to go to a hue saturation adjustment layer. Okay, let's grab our blues and then use this eyedropper here to grab this color. And just the saturation. Let's go ahead and expand our. There we go. Really just want this to be visible in the sky, so I'm kind of painting it away from here. I'm obviously not going to bump up the saturation that much, but I want to see what different hues look like. There we go. If I click on this colorize button, it's just going to like literally make everything one color, which I can then just like lower the opacity on. All right. There we go. All right, let's go ahead and flip this back upside down again, or right side up again. Cool. And I think we're looking really, really good. So there we have it. Let's hit full screen, Controller Command 0, and save our image out. So here we have our Bakster image of our young boy going on adventures with his best friend Bakster, who comes to life at night, and they're playing a game of hide and go seek here in the back alleys of Chicago. What a fun image. Thank you so much for watching. I really enjoyed working on this project, and I hope you enjoyed hanging out with me as well. I do gotta say that this is probably something that I want to revisit a couple of times. I mean, I made this image a couple of years ago for the first time, so I already have my final that I'm happy with, but it did take me a few days to work on the finishing touches when it comes to color and light, and I would recommend doing the same thing with any type of complex composite. So I'm looking at this and I'm like, it's not perfect, but it's pretty close, and it's time to wrap it up, or else it would just take me like 3 more hours, and that would be very boring for you. But if you are looking to do coloring and compositing and things like this, I really do recommend working on it, taking a break, coming back, taking a break, and coming back. I know I've said that a couple times, but that's the thing that I've found tends to work the best. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this project. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I really wish you all the best, health and love. Alrighty, I'll Phlearn you later. Bye everyone.